of celebrities. Well, that is all true. Hard to believe, but it's been a really interesting career that actually just ended 2 months ago. Probably most of you noticed I'm not on WZID anymore because frankly I just got tired of getting up at 3 in the morning. After being in radio for 43 years, roughly 30 of the last 43 have been getting up much too early. So now I sleep and I just do what I want. Try to catch up on sleep and doing more writing, another book and all that stuff. But you probably noticed the cover resembles another pretty well-known book. Purely accidental, I assure you. Now actually my real wish was that E.L. James, who wrote 50 Shades of Grey, would see this and sue me and give me all kinds of publicity. But apparently she didn't feel threatened by a guy with microphones on the tie. So, and just so you know, in case you do decide after tonight's presentation that you do perhaps want to own this, this piece of fine literature, there is no sex in it. So, oh good? You know, you're the last person I expected that from in this room. I'm looking at you and this woman, well, 50 Shades of Yellow with my book, baby. Well, there's a lot to say and a lot to share. And I think a lot of people enjoy this kind of talk because you don't always get to hear what goes on behind the scenes. You know, sometimes you watch these, how the movie was made or these other types of programs, and it's just kind of cool to see how things are done. So I'll share some of those behind the scenes stories. In fact, a few that I really couldn't put in the book, including my ongoing stalker incident, which has been going on for about 15 years, if you can believe that. I figured if I put that in the book, she's going to read it, be validated, and it would never end. So, but to start with, there's a list of questions that people ask me right off the bat. And I will take questions when we get toward the end, but I might answer a couple of these for you. Do you pick the music? Is a question. You think that the DJ picks the music these days? You can pretty much tell, right? The way the same song plays about every 45 minutes. Now it's all research now, like anything else. There is very little spontaneity or creativity. A radio station determines what age group it wants to play to, and then researches the music that that group of people likes. Now when I was at WZID, the audience was largely female, roughly 25 to 54. At least that's who we wanted it to be. So if it was a song that a 62-year-old man liked or a 19-year-old girl, didn't get played on the air because it would have probably driven away the core audience, which was where all the money was. So no, we do not pick our music, although when I started radio in 1971, I did, as did all DJs. Did you use a script? No. Can't really do a 5-hour show every day and plan it out ahead of time because it would take, you know, 5 to 7 hours a day before to plan it, and then you get even less sleep. So much of it, even though we kind of had a game plan in the morning, sort of like a road map, we would veer and take little shortcuts and end arounds to fit whatever our creative minds were feeling that particular morning. So much of what you hear is pretty much happening in real time and as it's occurring to the radio personalities. But you also know that there has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you try to do something that has some kind of a payoff for the listener after you've been talking about something for a few moments. One of the #1 things people say to me, they say, "You don't look like you sound." to which I usually say, "Well, you don't either." Excuse me? I'm handsomer? I'm handsomer than I sound? Oh, thank you. I love you. All right, now let's... what time do you go to bed? Well, I got up at 3:15, so I would go to bed 9:30, 10 o'clock, which is not nearly enough sleep. So it's just, you know, there'll be plenty of time to sleep someday. Do people recognize you when they hear your voice? Yeah, it happens a lot, as you might expect. When you least expect it, people will say, "Hey, where do I know that voice from?" My favorite #1 thing that people say to me, and it's always women, they say, "I wake up with you in bed every morning." And I say, "Well, you slut." But it's true. And, but honestly, you know, I may joke about it, but it was really an honor to have people, because you got a lot of choices, to pick our show every day. And part of the key to being successful on the radio is to share your everything that you do in your life. And not just like you know, we got bills to pay and groceries to buy, and we have problems in our lives, we have happy moments in our lives, and that's what everybody has. And so if you can relate to that and share that, people go, oh yeah. And eventually, before you know it, you're almost a part of the family, because they feel like they know. People say, I feel like I've known you forever. Well, I've been on the radio in New England for 30 years, and there are some people who've listened to all 3 decades, and they've heard a lot of stories and a lot of things. A favorite example of mine, I have a daughter who is now 34. Now, when I moved here in 1984, exactly, well, last week in August 1984, 30 years ago, she was 4 years old. And we would have her on the radio occasionally, just, you know, because she was cute, and, you know, who doesn't love a kid on the radio if you don't overdo it? So, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was out somewhere, and somebody said, how's your daughter? She must be, what, about 8 now? Yeah, and I'm still 35. So it's that kind of connection that you make with your audience that means a lot, and I assume part of the reason that you're here tonight, because you've listened to some degree to various stations. Is there anybody that ever heard me before WZID, which was the last 20 years? So how far do you go back? CGY?
CGY.
So nobody goes back to WZOU. That was 1984. It's now Jam in 94.5. But so WCGY, there's a lot of really great stories from that era. WCGY was a rock station, actually physically in Lawrence, but serving the Boston and New Hampshire area, and it was owned by Kurt Gowdy. Now there's a name we know, right? Kurt Gowdy, great sportscaster, owned radio and TV stations around the country, and boy, I tell you, that was back in the day before everything got so darn corporate. It was like working at a mom and pop grocery store. You know, we made our own decisions. We weren't paid a lot, but we had more fun. Now, and I'll share some stories that you'll see you could never do now, because everything is so corporate. And if you want to do a stunt like I've done, and I'll share in a moment, you almost have to get permission from the lawyers in triplicate, and it has to be run up the flagpole 50 times, as opposed to just being spontaneous, which is the attraction to me of being on the radio. So that's harder to happen, and one of the reasons that I felt that maybe it was time for me to leave, because I was finding less of those opportunities to create some good theater of the mind, which is what I actually loved about being in radio. All right, so I talked about waking up with women in bed every morning. There was one woman in my career. This is in Toledo, Ohio. The year is probably 1976. I'm 25 years old, and she's beginning to call me on the phone. Now, not unusual. People call and make requests. People call to say hello, which is very nice. I'm always flattered by that. This particular woman really did it a lot. And she actually was about 70 years old, and I'm 25 at the time, and that's fine. So she started coming to the radio station, and she would bring me gifts. She, very sweet, she brought me a winter coat. She would send me cards, you know, like greeting cards in the mail with a $5 bill in it, like your grandma used to do. And which was very sweet, but here's a woman that lived in subsidized housing on the other side of town, and I don't think she had much family, so she was lonely, and somehow I must have connected with her on the radio. And so that was very nice, and I was just this young guy, and I mean, I'm still nice to people, but I was really nice to her. She even sent me a mood ring. Who remembers mood rings? Who's wearing one right now? Oh, thank God, nobody. All right. In Hudson, 6 people raised their hand. So anyway, she would take the bus downtown Toledo and come up and see me. And I mean, I couldn't spend much time with her. I was on the job. So one day an envelope arrived. It was a manila, 8x11 envelope. And inside was a picture. Oh, this is nice. She's sending me a picture. So I pulled it out. Naked photo. Oh, the humanity. 70 years old. What did you say? Did I hear the word wrinkles come out of your mouth? Well, anyway, it was at that point that I pretty much had to say, I think, please don't call anymore. Yeah, I feel badly, but you can't do that. All right, so let's flash forward now another 25 years. It's 2000. I'm pretty close to 50 at this point. and I'm working at a station in Nashua, and I'm working with a woman, won't give her name, although you probably would know her, and for Christmas, she gives me a naked picture of herself in a frame, in a beautiful pewter frame. I mean, it was very artsy looking, and I mean, it was, yeah, artsy looking, that's, no, I mean, it was not distasteful, but it was totally inappropriate. I think we can agree. And in today's world, can you imagine human resources or any, the lawyers getting a hold of that? I mean, usually it's the other way around, but, so I didn't say anything, I didn't acknowledge it, I didn't turn her in. I just felt it was awkward. It was just really strange. I have it here. Anybody want to see it? No, this guy does. No. So here's the side story on this particular woman who was a DJ. She had been engaged 5 times. I know that's a shock. And they were all to guys named Eric. You shake your head. I have no idea why. It's just the collection of people that you meet. And probably in your lives too, you've dealt with people that you just shake your head. And it's what makes, it's those textures in life that I've always found very interesting. And I wanted to write about. I mean, if you watch WKRP in Cincinnati, it was on in the 1970s. I mean, a lot of stories in this book are kind of from that feeling. So it was interesting. I've had my life threatened a couple times. I think the little poster says, "Oh, I know." One time it was by this woman here. No, actually her husband. Leave my woman alone. Yeah, I was working, this was in Detroit, one of my first jobs, overnight. I'm in college, I'm working the overnight shift at a country western station, and this phone rings at about 2:30, and it's a sheriff or a cop. He says, "I'm going to come down and kill you." "Oh, well, thanks very much. I like you too." So you can imagine, 23, 24 years old, you're by yourself in this radio station, and so I immediately called another police department and said, some cop just called up and said he's going to come down and shoot me. Didn't say why, he just, I probably said something that just hit him wrong. I can't remember what it was. So anyway, they offered to give me an escort out the building that night when I got off at 5 o'clock, which is great, but you're going to be here tomorrow and the next 3 years? So anyway, the guy called the next day and he apologized. And so probably drinking, who knows. But another time at WCGY, the Kirk County station, this was in the 80s, we had one of those big vans that you see driving around town, the radio station, the pictures of the personalities. Somebody had taken some black spray paint and on the side of it wrote, "Death to Morin," which, that's a little bit unsettling too. So, when you're in the public eye, you just never know. And I mean, there have been, unfortunately, a few radio and TV personalities assassinated over the years. But luckily, other than just a few threats, I'm still here today. And that's one of the serious parts of the talk. And another one is, it's all fun and games, but then you have the mornings when the world turns upside down. For instance, the marathon bombing, remember, in Boston a year and a half ago. As I watched TV that afternoon, that Monday afternoon in April, I immediately started thinking, okay, what the heck are we going to do with this on the air tomorrow? We're not going to be yucking it up. So I immediately got on the phone and started texting my partner, Tracy. I said, we got to line up psychologists, we got to line up police authorities, we have to line up, all these different people as experts to talk about what happened. Because we knew that's what the audience was thinking about, and we have to totally reflect what essentially is going on at the time. Or else people will just keep tuning until they find something that connects with them. So being aware of what's out there in the world, pop culture, and the news is very important in the job, and that was one example. Of course, the all-time example of that is 9/11. A horrible day, and I was on the air that morning, live, and a sportscaster who was doing my sports at the time, whose name is Ken Kale, was in a different location. He was doing it by phone from Concord, and I was in Nashua. And in the middle of the sports report, he says, "Mike, I'm watching Good Morning America, and I think a plane just flew into a building in New York City." So, of course, I'm thinking, well, Empire State Building, like in the 1940s, that little single-engine plane hit it or something. Well, of course, I don't have to tell you what the rest of the story was. And it was from that moment on, for about the next week, Well, maybe for a few days we knew we had to talk about that and let people grieve and vent, and that's what we did. It was the next couple days, it was people crying, I was crying, it was, you know how we all felt, right? I mean, it wasn't that long ago, so you know the memories are pretty fresh, and we're coming up on another anniversary here a week from today. But eventually, we have to get our lives back to normal. And as an entertainer, I wasn't really sure when that right moment was. What if we start yucking it up and it's too soon? We'll be viewed as being disrespectful. Or what if we wait too long and people just get bored with it and say, all right, I've moved on. How about you, funny boy? So eventually we did. I think the following Monday or Tuesday we started, okay, look, you got to have some laughs now. I feel really bad for comedians who had to work that weekend, the following, because it was a Tuesday that it happened, that may have had gigs over the weekend. How do you get up when the country is still mourning and actually make people laugh and not sound disrespectful? And I actually talked to Seth Meyers about that a couple years ago. We were talking with Seth, who, as you know, is from Bedford, New Hampshire, hosted his, the night show that he has. It was on Saturday Night Live, tremendously talented. Well, it turns out, just a few weeks later was his first night on Saturday Night Live. And so we interviewed him and I asked him about that. And so I transcribed what he said, and I think it's kind of interesting because everybody was wondering, when is it okay to enjoy life again? So he says, it was crazy. I moved to New York August 20th of that year, and our first show was September 29th. And it was a crazy night for me because it was both my first night on Saturday Night Live, a show I'd been watching my whole life, as well as the first Saturday Night Live back after 9/11. And Lorne Michaels invited Rudy Giuliani and all these police officers and firemen. It was amazing. You know, I look at it back and realize how positive it was. It let people know that it was all right to laugh again. Also, you saw the spirit of New York, and you got a sense of like, I think everything is going to be okay. It's going to take a while, but everything is going to be okay. And it was. But it's those kinds of moments that kind of bond a radio personality or a television comedian with your audience. It's something we're all sharing together, and we can be laughing one minute, but we can also be crying the next. So it's those kinds of emotions that we have to be aware of as personalities. And I mean, over the years I was on the air when President Reagan was shot in 1980 or 81. And so there are a lot of things that you share with your audience over the years. But knowing there's a lot of kids listening, I always felt it was important not to alarm them. I remember back the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. As I look around the room, most of you are old enough to remember that. I was scared to death. I was 11 years old at the time and didn't really understand. But it just, and as we know, it came that close to a confrontation. So I always kind of in my mind used to think, okay, you don't want to scare the kids, but I always encourage parents to talk to your children because we're going to discuss some things today that are not pleasant. And if you think your kids can't handle it, then this would be a good time to not listen. Or use it as a teaching opportunity and talk to your kids about these things because you can't run and hide in today's world. You have to understand these things happen. So that was my frame of mind. I talked about the death threats. Well, this didn't actually happen on the radio, but it was early in my career. I worked at McDonald's. Anybody else work at McDonald's at some point in their lives? I'm the only one. That's why I smell like shortening right now, actually. This was back when Big Macs were 35 cents and a hamburger was 20 cents and a shake was 35. But I was working as a janitor at 11 o'clock at night while I was in college, making $2.25 an hour, which was more than I was making my other part-time radio job at $1.60 an hour. I should have taken the cue then, but so there's a knock on the door, and I open the door, and these two guys with blue steel revolvers and these face masks jump in and make everybody, four of us, lay down on the ground. They tied us up, our wrists with terry cloth, and they duct taped our ankles together, and there we were at the mercy of a couple of people who wanted to get into the safe. Normally, I was not the guy. Normally I was the only guy there, but luckily that night the manager was there and a couple other people, so I would not have been able to open the safe. Fortunately, he did. They got away with $1,300, nobody was hurt, thank God. A couple years later, Well, you'd think I'm always getting into trouble, wouldn't you? A couple years later, I'm walking into a convenience store in suburban Toledo, which is where you could also buy hard liquor. In Ohio, they're called packies. So just getting out of my car, I see these two guys come running out with 24 suitcases of beer, and they're wearing these red Jesse James masks over their mouth. Well, I know this is not going to end well somehow. And so these guys just take one glance at me and then get into their car and drive off. Well, it turns out I knew one of the guys. So you can bet this guy was probably cramping his drawers when he realized that I would be able to positively identify him. So I went into the store, and the clerk, the woman was all shaken up, said, "Man, don't worry, you're okay. I got the license number." So they were apprehended. They'd been wanted for a long string of other convenience store holdups. And eventually they went to a high security prison in Ohio, and I moved out of Ohio within a year. I'm not stupid. Yeah, I knew the guy from my bowling league. He was on my bowling league. And it's like, really? So those are my brushes with guns and fast women, which sometimes go together, actually. Okay, so the fun stories. Those are some of the kind of tense moments. In 43 years. I have been buried alive 3 times. Now, you didn't know that, although maybe the lady in the back row maybe recall, because you did listen when I was at WZID. I did it to raise money for charity, which is kind of a weird thing to do. They had a guy named Dr. Silkini. He was like this carnival barker. He would come to town with this box a little bigger than the size of a coffin, and the top came off, and they would put the local DJ, wherever they were, into this box for 48 hours, and you would just be in there. You would do your radio show, because we had remote equipment. They put a camera in there so people could watch me on a TV monitor. And so this was 1989. My daughter is 9 years old, and she is kind of freaking out, as you can well imagine. But the weirdest thing about this, and I'm going to see if I can set up a couple chairs and demonstrate what this guy did. This Dr. Silkini was, he hypnotized me. Anybody ever been hypnotized? No, seriously, it is the coolest thing in the world. Well, this time it wasn't, but, so he wanted to hypnotize me and prove that it was mind over matter, that I would not be claustrophobic. I could get into this box for 48 hours and not freak out. Now, I can't imagine too many people would go along with that, right? But I did get paid, and in all honesty and full disclosure, I did get paid. It was to call attention to recycling. All right, so yeah, recycling my body apparently for the afterlife. So this guy says, we're going to prove that we can do Mike with his mind over matter. So I got on this chair with just my head right here on the end, and if I tried to do that, I would kill myself. But back then I was only 38 and a lot more flexible than I am now. So this chair is back further, and my head is just resting on the edge, and my ankles are resting on the edge of this chair, and I'm laid out, and the guy says, "Close your eyes. I want you to imagine that you are as stiff as a steel beam, and make yourself as rigid as you can. Keep your eyes closed. Focus. You are solid beam." Okay, so he goes through that deal, and I'm really, in fact, there's a picture of it in the book. So he's doing this thing, and he's talking, my eyes are still closed, and I felt what was like just some very soft rubbing on my chest and stomach. And until just a couple years ago, when I finally saw the video, the guy was walking up and down my body. Now, I'm not that big of a guy, and even then I was thinner. And so he really did, the mind over matter really does work. I have been hypnotized. I did a hypnosis show years ago to demonstrate how, what's it called when you come back as another, thank you, reincarnation. Yes, and it was just really bizarre. So you wake up, you feel like you had a good night's sleep. People use it now to quit smoking and lose weight, but it can be used recreationally, but not everybody can be hypnotized. So if you can't give up control for just a few minutes, don't even try. That was only the first time. Time number 2, I was put into a 5,000-pound block of ice. Ooh. See, don't you wish you knew me then? So this was at a car dealership in Lowell, raising money for Special Olympics. Good cause. Thought, okay, I can do this. So what they did, this is in the summer, I just walked in with a t-shirt, a pair of shorts, and into this great big 2.5-ton piece of ice. And I laid down for 48 hours. Now, how the heck do you do that, right? Well, I'm going to tell you, with every trick, there's always how it happens. What they did is they had this massive piece of ice, but inside they hollowed out the middle, and they put a clear plexiglass box. Did I disappoint you, ma'am? You thought I had superpowers, didn't you? Well, I have other superpowers. We'll talk later. So anyway, I'm laying down, and it looks like there's this guy with a t-shirt and shorts on in this ice cube. But we raised a lot of money, and it was, again, Dr. Silkini. And I said, look, I don't have to be hypnotized. I get the gig. I know how it is. Let's just go in and do it. So that was fun. Got a lot of publicity in the paper. Raised money for Special Olympics. The radio station gets publicity. I got a little extra money, and Special Olympics did well. So it was fun. And the third time was a week after I left WCGY. Kurt Gowdy sold the station, but we had already prearranged at Spooky World. Remember that Spooky World? So I'm out there in this box, right next to the line where people kind of queue up to the stage and take these spooky hay rides. And who was the entertainer that night? Those 2 nights, Tiny Tim. So I'm in this box listening to Tiny Tim sing all night. What did I do to deserve this? I interviewed him once, nice guy, but he was strange. He, I think, was OCD with cleanliness and stuff. I mean, even at a young age, he was wearing diapers. He was just a very unusual individual. But again, that's what makes a job like this weird, because you just don't see that stuff coming, and it really does happen. Okay, one thing I couldn't put in the book, because it's still happening, and that's I'm still being stalked by anybody see Play Misty for Me? It was a movie in the early 70s. It starred Clint Eastwood, Jessica Walters. It was about a late-night DJ in Carmel, California, and this really creepy woman. I mean, mine's not nearly as dangerous, but it's just weird. This is very strange. In 1995 or 6, I was doing the afternoon show on WZID before I went to the morning show. And about 6 o'clock one night, this woman called, and she needed the name of an artist for a song or something, and I gave it to her, and we engaged in some conversation, because frankly, I was bored, and she seemed really nice. So, maybe a few days later, we had drinks at a lounge which was on the bottom floor of the station. The station's still there on Commercial Street, up on the 5th floor. Millie's Tavern is the place, right? You've heard of that? It wasn't Millie's then, but it was something else, and so it was convenient for me. So we had drinks there, and one other time we had dinner at the High Five, which was that restaurant right downtown on top of the Wall Street Towers. So that was it. I mean, nothing happened, I swear. About 7 or 8 years later, my boss at WZID gets an email from her, and I'm copied on it. It says, you know, you really shouldn't have somebody like Mike Morin working at your station, because he did some really bad things you'd be ashamed of. Which, of course, I didn't, and I went right to the boss and said, don't worry, she's got nothing. I explained pretty much what I just explained to you, and you know, they know me well enough to believe me, and so I thought that would be the end of the story. It wasn't. She continued to email me. She apologized. She recanted her story, and she started emailing me, and to this day still does. I have never once answered one of her emails or acknowledged that she's been doing this. And some of the most bizarre emails, she would actually send stuff to me and copy it to people like Sam Donaldson of ABC News. Why? The late David Brudnoy from WBZ, just a variety of personalities. So I did a little research on her, you know, because you can find out almost anything about anybody. There wasn't much, but I found that her brother does a stage show having to do with mental illness. I mean, it's, I mean, I've never seen it, never heard of it, but there was some video, and I watched it, and it was respectfully done, and he talks a lot about their mother had, I don't know if she was bipolar or had, you know, some mental issues, and so a few people in my life who work in medicine said, yeah, sounds like she's got some things going on there. And when I get a big rush of emails, we know that she's not on her meds. And when it quiets down for a couple of months, we know that she's taking her treatment. So it was really kind of sad, and he helped me understand it. But it doesn't, you know, I don't know how to deal with it except to ignore it. You know, she lives in Washington, D.C., by the way, so she's, you know, pretty much out of the picture. She shares every detail about how she hates her ex-husband with me, like, you know, like I really care. But maybe Sam Donaldson does, I don't know. But I did run off a note that I got a few months ago from her. I mean, after this thing with my boss, after that happened, I started collecting all the emails and saving them. Because if she ever pulled that one again, I would at least have the evidence that there's something not right and that, you know, everything's okay with me. Last I checked. Dear Mike Morin, when I realized today it had been 18 years since 1996, the year you so kindly befriended me as an afternoon DJ, a year or two before you left WZID and returned as the morning powerhouse replacement of Charlie O'Brien, I thought I would email you one more time. I thought I saw that cute FBI agent I met in '96 at lunch today, but he sure looked a lot older. May you have a long life and never regret befriending me. Boy, if only she knew I was talking about her now. I helped you return to WZID. Fan love is incredibly influential. By my belief in you, but you were the one that did all the work to get and stay on the air. Well, my goodness, happy 18, what a surprise. Best friend always. And then she signs her name. I mean, it's sad, and it's weird, and it's funny, it's all at the same time. And I'm not the only one that gets these things. I mean, if you talk to any other DJ or television personality, you would find that they have dealt with people like that as well. And once in a while it does become tragic. This one did not seem that way. I think she's a frustrated writer and wants to just exercise her writing chops and send me stuff. Because she sends, that's just one small example. I've got hundreds of sheets, so. That's my stalker story, but can you imagine if I'd have put that in the book? It would have totally validated her, and there would be no end to it. So, however, big stack of emails may very well make a very interesting novel someday. So then I may thank her in the beginning acknowledgments part of the book, but it won't be about a radio personality. Yeah. Celebrities. People say, all right, who is your favorite celebrity? We talked to hundreds of them over the years. I've been to the Grammys a couple times, so I got to meet, you know, all kinds of, you know, pretty famous people. The Grammy after parties are the coolest thing, man. They have amazing food and the widest variety of celebrities, random, no connection, you have no idea why they're there. People like Donald Trump and Downtown Julie Brown from MTV and Bob Vila from This Old House, and Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. Those are 4 people that I saw just within like a 5-minute period when I went to a Grammy party in New York. But not all celebrities are all that great to interview. We would pre-tape our interviews because you just never know what somebody's going to say. Not so much profanity, but I have a couple stories about that in a minute, but more about the quality. Is it going to be any good? Is it going to be entertaining? God, I talked to Bill Cosby 10 years ago, pre-taped. It went 25 minutes, and because of his storytelling, there's not one little 5-minute segment I could pull out and use, which is too bad because he's such a great guy. All right, so I'm going to drop a dime now on a couple celebrities whose names you'll know. One is Mario Lopez. Good-looking guy. Saved by the Bell, remember him? Extra, correspondent there. We call him one morning, tape is rolling, and he sounds like he's on a treadmill. He sounds so disengaged, he's not at all interested in what we're asking him. I have no idea why he's bothering to even talk to us. Usually we get to talk to celebrities because they're promoting something. So we get a big name, we get a big star, they get to plug their book, their movie, their TV show. So that one doesn't air. Robert Vaughn, who remembers Man from U.N.C.L.E., right? Great show, great actor. I think he was doing some lawyer ads fairly recently. He did an autobiography. It was great. I read it. I loved it. I'm the right age to enjoy those stories. Got him on the air. Had all my questions prepped from the book. It was as if I was talking some other language. He just couldn't put 2 sentences together. I feel badly. I mean, he's pretty elderly now, and maybe he was just having a bad day. So that one didn't happen. All right, remember the band Emerson, Lake and Palmer? They had a few big hits in the 70s. Lucky Man was one of them, Nut Rocker. They did a couple other ones. Pretty popular band. So I had a chance to talk to Keith Emerson. He was in England at the time, and I had his phone number. Normally, somebody calls us on behalf of a celebrity, but once in a while you actually get their number. So I called. So if it's 9 o'clock in New Hampshire, it's either 2 or 3 o'clock in England, depending on if it's daylight saving time or not. Phone rings. Person picks up the phone. Hello. Well, it was Keith Emerson's elderly mother, and she was really sweet. And I explained who I was, and could I please talk to your son? Well, he's sleeping right now. Well, of course he is. He's a rock star. He's supposed to sleep at 2 in the afternoon. But we do have an interview. Could you get him up, please? So she did. About 5 minutes later, he comes to the phone, and he is so incoherent. I don't know if he was just probably just sleepy, groggy, on drugs. I have no idea. Nothing he said made any sense. Didn't use that interview. But I did learn a very valuable lesson from the Keith Emerson interview, and that is next time you call a rock star and mom answers, interview her because she's going to have the good stories. Damn it, I wish I'd have thought of that, because I bet you moms love to embarrass their kids, true? Yeah. So I know that she would have had some really good stories. People often say, who was your favorite? How are we doing on time? We'll go 20 more minutes or so, and then we'll take questions, and then I'll sign books. One of the most interesting people, well, I've talked to hundreds, but regardless of what you think of his politics, President Barack Obama was a guest on our show on Election Day 2012. That was a pretty good scoop for, a station in New Hampshire, because they were just doing a couple stations around the country, and we were selected as one of them. And so that was pretty cool. First time I talked to a sitting president. And we debated on what to talk to him about, because you figure it's election day. No matter what you ask a politician, I find it, if you say, what color is the sky, they'll immediately go to, well, we've got to reduce taxes, and we have to stop the immigration and all that stuff. Doesn't matter what you ask them. I really didn't want that kind of an interview for a very special moment in my career, and frankly in his. He needed to sound good, because it was a very tight race with Mr. Romney, as you recall. So Tracy and I said, let's just completely